Welcome to our deep dive into the origins of life. You sent over some pretty fascinating excerpts from a book, and I'm really excited to unpack this with you. We're tackling the biggest mystery there is. How did life even begin? From non-living matter to, well, us. It's mind-boggling.
What I find most intriguing is how we just accept life as a given. We're surrounded by it, so we don't often stop and think about how extraordinary it is that it exists at all.
Yeah, we need a fresh perspective to really grasp this, don't we? To step back and ask, what's the fundamental difference between something that's alive and, say, a rock?
Well, the book actually uses this clever analogy to illustrate the point. It borrows a bit from the Monty Python dead parrot sketch to really highlight the difference between living and dead.
Okay, so I'm picturing John Cleese, that frustrated customer in the pet shop. What does a dead parrot have to do with the origins of life?
It's all about the activity of life. The dead parrot, or ex-parrot, is made up of the same stuff as a living one. The difference is that the living parrot is constantly doing something. It's maintaining itself, engaging in those metabolic processes that Cleese talks about. Like the book argues, is more than just existing. It's about actively resisting a tendency we see everywhere else in the universe: entropy.
So it's not enough to just have the right building blocks like carbon and water. Those elements have to be actively working together, fighting against falling apart.
Exactly. That's a really key insight. The second law of thermodynamics tells us that everything tends towards disorder. Think about your desk. If you leave it alone, it naturally gets messier, not tidier. That's entropy in action.
Yeah, my desk is definitely proof of that. But how does this connect back to the parrot?
Well, that ex-parrot is succumbing to entropy. Its cells are no longer maintaining their complex organization. So it decays, returns to a simpler state. Living things, however, constantly use energy to fight against this tendency. They maintain their intricate structures and processes, keeping entropy at bay.
Wow, so every living thing is engaged in this epic battle against disorder just to exist. That really reframes how we think about life. It's not passive, it's an active process. But where does the energy for this constant fight come from?
That's another crucial piece of the puzzle. Life needs a constant input of energy to fuel its battle against entropy. It's like a whirlpool. A constant flow of energy maintains the form, but the water itself is always changing.
Okay, so life needs energy. We also need those raw materials, those building blocks you mentioned. The book talks about carbon being particularly important. Why carbon? What makes it so special?
Carbon is unique because of its ability to form a huge variety of complex molecules. It can bond with up to 4 other atoms, creating these intricate chains, rings, and other structures. Think of it like those construction toys with rods and connectors. Carbon is incredibly versatile, making it the ideal backbone for those large molecules essential to life, like proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, and nucleic acids like DNA and RNA.
Right, those macromolecules are like the machinery of the cell, carrying out all those essential functions. But machines need power, right? How do cells get the energy to run all these processes?
The book dives into this fascinating concept of metabolism. That's the complex network of chemical reactions that keep a cell running. These reactions are incredibly efficient thanks to enzymes. They act like tiny catalysts, speeding things up. And the energy currency that powers all this is a molecule called ATP. But the really mind-blowing part is where scientists think life got this energy in the first place.
Okay, I'm ready for the mind-blowing part. Where did this all begin?
The book points to an environment that seems incredibly hostile to life as we know it: hydrothermal vents. These are fissures in the ocean floor spewing superheated, chemically rich water. Not exactly a paradise, right?
Wait, so life might have started in these dark, scorching hot underwater vents. That seems counterintuitive.
It does. But think about it. You've got heat, you've got a mix of chemicals, and crucially, you have a gradient of hydrogen ions, or H+, between the vent fluids and the surrounding seawater. This difference in concentration acts like a battery, a source of potential energy that could have driven those first steps towards life.
So in these vents, you have building blocks and energy source. It's starting to sound like a primordial soup kitchen. But even with the right ingredients and energy, how did those first molecules organize themselves into something we could actually call alive?
That's where things get really fascinating. The book describes how lipid membranes, which naturally repel water, might have spontaneously formed around clusters of these complex molecules in the vent environment.
So like each cluster got its own little protective bubble, separating it from the chaotic world outside, kind of like those tiny underwater soap bubbles you see sometimes?
That's a great way to visualize it. These bubbles, or vesicles, are thought to be the precursors to the first cells. They created enclosed compartments where the chemical reactions of life could take place in a more controlled way, shielded from the harsh environment outside. And remarkably, cells later evolved their own way to generate that H plus gradient, using food as an energy source rather than relying on the vent environment.
So they became self-sufficient, their own little powerhouses. But even with a membrane and a way to generate energy, didn't they need instructions, some kind of blueprint to tell those molecules how to arrange themselves and function as a living unit?
That's the next incredible chapter in the story, and it takes us to the realm of genetics. We might assume DNA was running the show from the beginning, but the book suggests a more intriguing possibility. That RNA, a close relative of DNA, might have been the star of the show in the very beginning.
Okay, so RNA came first, but why the switch to DNA later on?
Well, think about it this way. RNA is great at multitasking. It can carry genetic information like DNA, but it can also act like an enzyme speeding up chemical reactions. But RNA is also less stable than DNA. It's like writing with a pencil.
Yeah.
Easy to change, but also easy to smudge or erase.
So RNA is more adaptable, but DNA is the reliable archivist, like upgrading from a notepad to a secure hard drive.
Exactly. DNA with its double helix structure is much more stable and resistant to errors. This stability becomes essential for the next big development in the story of life, evolution.
Okay, so we've got these protocells powered by clever chemistry, and they've got DNA as their instruction manual. How does this lead to the incredible diversity of life we see today? From single-celled organisms to what happens next?
Well, that's where things get really exciting, and that's where we'll pick up next time.
I can't wait. This is already blowing my mind. All right, so last time we left off with these incredible protocells powered by ingenious chemistry, carrying DNA as their instruction manual. I'm ready to dive back in. So how does this lead to the incredible diversity of life we see today? We're talking about the leap from single-celled organisms to, well, everything.
Well, that journey is where evolution takes center stage. The book highlights how DNA's stability is crucial for this process. It acts like a historical record, a memory bank of successful adaptations that allowed a species to thrive.
So it's like a DNA is a library, storing all the lessons learned over millions of years of trial and error. But how did those lessons get written in the first place? Like, how does life actually change and adapt over time?
That's where mutations come in. These are random changes in the DNA sequence that can happen when it's being copied. Imagine it like typos that occasionally pop up when transcribing a book. Most mutations are neutral or even harmful, but sometimes a mutation gives an organism an advantage in its environment.
It's like winning the genetic lottery. Most tickets are duds, but every now and then someone hits the jackpot. But how does a single lucky mutation lead to entirely new species?
Well, the book gives a great example. Imagine a mutation that allows an organism to utilize a new food source. Suddenly, it has access to a whole new buffet, while its competitors are stuck with the old menu.
That's a huge leg up in the survival game. More food, more energy, more offspring. But are we talking about just competition? Is that the only driving force in evolution? What about collaboration or even altruism in nature?
Those are fantastic questions, and they point to the complexity of evolution. While competition is a key factor, it's not the whole story. The book also delves into this fascinating concept of horizontal gene transfer, which was particularly common in early life.
Horizontal gene transfer? That sounds intriguing. What is that?
Imagine organisms swapping genes like trading cards. They weren't just passing genes down through their offspring, but sharing them directly with other organisms, sometimes even across different species.
Wow, so it wasn't just about competition. It was like they were all experimenting together, sharing solutions and trying out different combinations to see what worked best.
That's a great way to think about it. It challenges that notion of evolution as a purely individualistic struggle. In those early stages, horizontal gene transfer may have been crucial for accelerating the diversification of life. It's like open source coding, where everyone contributes to the development of new and innovative solutions.
That makes sense. But at some point, life did become more complex. With specialized cells forming multicellular organisms, I imagine swapping genes willy-nilly wouldn't be as beneficial at that point. You don't want to throw a random wrench into a finely tuned machine.
You're exactly right. The book suggests that as life became more complex, this free-for-all gene swapping became riskier. Organisms started relying more on passing genes down through their offspring, what we call vertical gene transfer. This shift marks a crucial turning point, the true beginning of distinct species lineages.
So it's like they went from open source coding to proprietary software, protecting their hard-won genetic innovations. But I'm still wrestling with this idea of purpose. You mentioned earlier that life has a purpose. What does that mean exactly? Are we all just driven by this imperative to survive and reproduce?
The book tackles this idea head-on. It argues that while the universe itself might not have an inherent purpose, life brings something new to the equation. It introduces the concept of value.
Okay, so it's not like there's some grand cosmic plan, but rather life itself creates meaning and purpose.
Precisely. Think about it. Before life, things just were, there was no concept of good or bad, no benefit or detriment. But with the arrival of living organisms, suddenly there were things that mattered for their survival and well-being.
So life brought with it this idea of value, of
Right.
something being good or bad for something else.
Exactly. And that's a fundamental shift in perspective. This inherent drive for self-preservation shapes everything a living organism does, from seeking out food and shelter to forming complex social structures.
So even those seemingly selfless acts, like a parent protecting its offspring, are ultimately driven by this underlying imperative to ensure the survival of their genes.
That's a common interpretation within evolutionary biology. But it's important to remember that the book doesn't present this as the only story. The emergence of life also introduced something else into the universe, a subjective perspective.
A subjective perspective, how does that tie into the bigger picture of life's purpose?
Before life, there was no experience, no feeling. With life came the ability to sense the world, to react to stimuli, to feel pleasure and pain. This subjective experience, this awareness of oneself and the world, is the foundation for everything we associate with consciousness.
So we've gone from inanimate matter to self-replicating molecules, from single-celled organisms to complex creatures with feelings, motivations, and an awareness of their own existence. It's almost too much to wrap my head around. It makes you wonder, where do we go from here?
And that's the beauty of it. Understanding the origins of life isn't about finding a definitive answer. It's about appreciating the journey, the incredible chain of events that led to our existence. And it prompts us to ask even bigger questions.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, if life's primary purpose is self-preservation, how did we get from those simple self-replicating molecules to the staggering diversity and complexity we see in the natural world? And perhaps even more importantly, what does this tell us about our place in the universe?
Those are some seriously profound questions. This whole deep dive is making me rethink everything I thought I knew about life. It's truly humbling to realize how much we still don't know.
And that's what makes it so exciting. There's always more to discover, more layers to peel back, more mysteries to unravel. This journey of understanding is never truly finished.
It's just incredible to think that we're all a part of this grand experiment that began billions of years ago in those hydrothermal vents, from the simplest bacteria to, well, us. It's a mind-blowing lineage. But it feels like we've only just scratched the surface. What other fascinating details did the book highlight about this incredible journey?
Well, one thing that really stood out to me was the role of viruses in shaping evolution. These tiny packets of genetic material are constantly interacting with cells, sometimes inserting their own genes into the host's DNA. It adds a whole other layer of complexity to the story of life.
Viruses, they always seem to be causing trouble. But are you saying they might actually have played a key role in driving evolution? How does that even work?
Well, think of it like this. Viruses can act as vectors for genetic innovation. By inserting their genes into a host's DNA, they can introduce new traits and variations that might never have arisen through traditional mutation.
So they're like tiny genetic engineers, shuffling the deck and creating new possibilities for life to explore.
That's a great way to put it. And it really challenges our traditional view of viruses as purely harmful entities. It suggests they might be an integral part of the evolutionary dance, contributing to the diversity and adaptability of life.
It's like realizing that even the villains in the story have a role to play, you know? This whole deep dive has really expanded my understanding of how life works, how interconnected it all is. But it's also made me realize how much we still don't know.
Absolutely. The more we learn, the more we realize how much there is still to explore. Each discovery opens up new avenues of inquiry, new mysteries to unravel.
It makes you wonder what other surprises are hidden in the vast tapestry of life. What other secrets are waiting to be uncovered?
Oh, undoubtedly, there are countless wonders still out there, just waiting for us to find them. Maybe one day we'll discover life on another planet, perhaps even life that doesn't rely on carbon or DNA as we know it.
Can you imagine encountering life that evolved under completely different conditions, with a completely different set of rules? It would fundamentally challenge everything we think we know about life's possibilities.
Exactly. It would force us to reevaluate our assumptions, to broaden our perspectives, and to appreciate the sheer creativity of the universe. It would be a truly awe-inspiring moment in human history.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling inspired to keep exploring, to keep learning, to keep asking those big questions. This deep dive has been an incredible journey.
And that's what it's all about, fostering that sense of wonder, that thirst for knowledge, that desire to understand our place in the grand scheme of things.
And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the origins of life. Thank you for taking this journey with us. We hope it sparked your curiosity and left you with a sense of awe for the incredible story of life on Earth.
And remember, the exploration doesn't have to end here. There are countless resources out there for those who want to delve deeper into this fascinating subject. Who knows, maybe one day you'll be the one making groundbreaking discoveries, adding your own chapter to this incredible story.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and never stop